It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
The number one thing that I tell parents is to start thinking about screens holistically. So what I mean by that is stop trying to differentiate between, them doing social media, them doing YouTube.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm on my own today, but, not quite. Kylie's not joining me, but I do have somebody that I think is just knowledgeable when it comes to screens and our kids, specifically boys and gaming. I'm speaking with Brad Marshall today on the Happy Families podcast. Brad is known as the Unplugged Psychologist, written a couple of books and working in private practice in Sydney. I'm guessing at the moment, Brad, it would be pretty hard for people to get their kids to see you. There'd be a lot of parents who are concerned about their kids and the way they're interacting with screens.
Yeah, I mean, being the start of a school year, there's always a lot of trouble getting kids off screens and back to school. So the wait list is pretty, specifically long for the clinic at the moment. But hopefully we can get some information out to parents via podcast and other means like this. So it's great to be here.
So Brad, describe for people who are perhaps not familiar with what you would do as a psychologist in relation to kids' screens. And I'm going to use the word addiction. You can say what you want about that, but just that's the way that parents are referring to it. Kids' screens, addictions, that sort of stuff. What is the work that you do specifically?
Yeah, so I mean, for a little over the last 10 years, I have a clinic, the Internet Addiction Clinic at Kidspace, and is going to be renamed the Internet Gaming Disorder Clinic quite soon. As you referenced there, some people don't like the addiction term, but anyway, if we just sort of move past that. So what I do on the day-to-day is I see kids and families, mostly boys, but some girls as well, that are struggling with screens, gaming, social media, YouTube, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes they've got other things going on as well in the mental health sphere, so depression, ADHD, anxiety, but not always. I see those children, teenagers and their families, and I help them, calm things down and get back to some level of normal again.
So I'm excited to talk to you about all these things today for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a topic that parents cannot wrap their heads around and get enough information about. It's one of those things that I'm endlessly asked about, and obviously with the work that you do, you are as well. But additionally, in just over a month, on April 6th, you and I are going to be joining forces with a whole lot of other experts in issues related to boys for the Happy Families Bringing Up Boys Summit. And as a special guest on the summit, I thought it would be great to bring you into the podcast and give people a taste of what you're offering, because the summit is going to be an extended version of this with a whole lot of great information about boys and screens, boys and emotions, boys and friends, boys and sex, boys and you name it. We're talking about everything boy related, and you are our boys and gaming guy. So for our conversation today, I actually want to start off by being a bit provocative. Which is, I was going to say that's unlike me, but that was sarcasm intended. I tend to be a little bit of I like to poke the bear. There's a brand new research paper that's been published just in the last few months. It comes from the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, highly prestigious university, prestigious group of researchers. And the headline of the article says, and I quote, "Time spent playing video games is unlikely to impact well-being." And I thought, who better to talk to about this than Brad Marshall, the unplugged psychologist, the guy who spends his days working with kids whose well-being is arguably being impacted quite strenuously because of their time spent playing video games. At least that's the perception of their parents. I've sent the article to you, and I thought we could just talk about it for a bit and maybe unpick it a little bit and talk about why this is such a confusing and challenging issue for parents when the research is saying one thing and parents are experiencing another. And then there's researchers over here that are supporting the parents and some who are arguing with them. What did you think when you read this article?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. And I do agree with you. It's very difficult for parents to decipher this stuff. Even parents that may be academic themselves, it's a bit of a minefield, because you have to really understand what they're looking at and what they're reporting and whether it's a sound study or not. And, I've said to you on previous occasions, Justin, I'm a pretty terrible academic. I'm doing a PhD in treatment of gaming at the moment, but I wouldn't sort of describe myself as a researcher and academic. But I think my first impressions of this article were, there's some classic stuff there that people who have done research before would understand is not ideal. And this is not to say that we should just ignore the whole paper, but there are some things in there, like the paper wasn't pre-registered, the study itself wasn't pre-registered. So for parents at home, what that means is you're not really, that they haven't independently logged on and talked about what they're trying to achieve in this paper. And the reason that's a problem is that it doesn't really constitute gold standard practice, because it means that some people, and I'm not suggesting these authors have, but some people can then go on a bit of a fishing expedition and kind of find what they want to find, if you will, in the data. But if we just push past some of those sorts of design limitations, and the fact that there is no qualification of limitations, and the fact that it's not actually published, I mean, it's in review, so it has not been peer reviewed yet. So it looks like a paper that you should very much listen to. The biggest part of this, though, that has me concerned is that, parents would hear other experts say, oh, see, look, don't worry about it. There's no problem with gaming for your kids. Look at this study here. It's done by Oxford. But again, the devil is in the detail, right? The average age of the participants in this study are 34, and they do not take into account kids. And we know that in Australia, gaming mostly impacts kids. And so the precipice of that, of gaming and gaming issues in Australia, is 16. So they haven't really looked at the cohort that are most impacted. And then, of course, there is the massive elephant in the room here with this one, in that they have gotten their data for this study via the gaming industry.
Righto, after the break, we're going to give 3 tips for what parents can do if they feel like their kids are on those screens, particularly gaming, a little bit too much.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
For a happier family, try a Happy Families membership, because a happy family doesn't just happen. Details at happyfamilies.com.au.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. My name is Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm hanging out with the soon-to-be doctor, but currently the unplugged psychologist, Brad Marshall. And Brad has written a couple of books about internet and gaming disorder and kids and screens and all those sorts of things, which we will link to in the show notes. Brad, let's talk practical stuff. We've geeked out a bit on the science and probably lost 3/4 of our listeners because of that, but I think we've got to talk practical stuff, right? What would you say is the number one thing, the most helpful thing that you've seen in your clinical practice that makes a difference, that really moves the needle for parents who are struggling with kids who are using their screens in ways that, let's call it unhealthy, using their screens in unhealthy ways?
Yeah, look, the number one thing that I tell parents is to start thinking about screens holistically. So what I mean by that is stop trying to differentiate between, them doing social media, them doing YouTube, them doing Netflix and streaming, them doing gaming. So many parents go, oh, look, but I'm a rock star parent. I limit my child to 2 hours a day of gaming, but then you look at it and it's, well, they've got 6 hours of YouTube. So overall, that's 8 hours a day. And so the first thing for parents is don't worry too much about what they're actually doing. I mean, within reason, you don't want them sort of doing illegal things or unsafe things, but for the most part, try not to get into the micromanaging of exactly what's going on, but it's an overall amount of time online that can impact their well-being. So that's the number one tip there.
But I'm going to just jump in, Brad, because it gets confusing for parents as well, because they'll be like, okay, well, I'm trying to minimize the amount of time that they're on a screen so that they can do all the other things in life that matter. Like be with their friends and be active and be involved in sports or hobbies or other activities. But now you look at what the last couple of years with COVID has done. They're supposed to be online so that they can do all of their schoolwork. And they tell me that they're doing the schoolwork, but then when I walk into the room, they're on YouTube or they're playing Minecraft, and I tell them that they've only got an hour, but they've now used 45 minutes and they've been gaming, and I say, well, I still need another hour because I've got to do my homework. And the parents are kind of blowing up about that. So there's a boundaries issue, isn't there? You want the kids to have a certain amount of screen time and then close it down, except there's so much of their life that is now on there, and that whole what kind versus how much issue raises its head.
Yeah, I mean, look, and that's a very good debate. And there is actually a bit of research around, the quality, if you will. So something educational versus something that's sort of not educational or recreational. But the problem is that for parents, you have to be like a proper hacker to understand what's going on. You can get sold these software applications, but it becomes very difficult and kids find their way around them. So that ends up as a bit of a minefield. My first step in the Tech Diet for Your Child and Teen, my parenting book, the unplug step number 1 is to control the Wi-Fi. And that's a holistic approach around if you control the Wi-Fi and there is a set amount of hours that they're on per day, then that's giving them some autonomy over, look, you've got 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever it is that you agree with them. And essentially, you are very much steering them towards doing their homework in that time. And if not, the teachers are going to tell you. But you can't micromanage that, because it ends up in a bit of a war in your house if you're trying to overlook them on the screen 24/7. And kids, have many ways around that as well.
Yeah, and that's it. It turns into a power struggle, doesn't it? I wonder, what's the most common complaint that you have from parents when they bring their kids to see you? The number one thing, and I know you're dealing primarily with the clinical population, but even so, a lot of parents will relate, I'm sure.
Yeah, look, so I'm going to be difficult here and not give you one, I'll give you two. So it's sleep, especially for teenagers.
Yeah.
And the second one is especially primary school kids spending money. Just not being able to really understand all the microtransactions, and I've got my card linked to something and I can't understand why they keep clicking on it, and it's kind of like you going to some resort in Fiji, and having a tab there and then wondering why your kids are ordering room service and all the rest of it. Like, it's just funny money to them, right? They don't understand. And so they're going to run your tab up and deal with it later. So
yeah. We've got Pokemon Go for our 7-year-old. She just loves playing Pokemon Go. She loves trying to capture an Eevee or a Pikachu or whatever. And we were unavailable for her one evening, and we told her big sister, 18 years old, we said, hey, Ella, download Pokemon Go and just take her for a walk for an hour. Go and catch a couple of Pokemon. And what that will do is that will give us the time that we need to get the stuff done that we're doing. We just need a bit of space, please. Go and do that. So Ella downloaded Pokemon Go and then handed the phone over to Emily, and she spent $50 in 5 minutes playing Pokemon Go. She just started downloading stuff, and Ella kind of came to us and was like, oh, Dad, my bank account's just been drained with Pokemon Go. So we got to have that conversation then, but we police it differently as adults, but Ella wasn't watching. She's 18. She just let her go for it. But it's not just the spending money on games. I'd imagine that you'd see a lot of kids who are gambling online.
Yeah, absolutely. That's mainly the teenagers, but it's been getting younger and younger. I think for some kids it is sort of premeditated, but for a lot of kids it's not. They just get sucked into it. But it's very common for parents to come to me and say, there's a couple of $1,000s worth of charges on there. Yeah. I think the record in my clinic is 70,000.
No.
But yeah. And there's been plenty of kids in the tens of thousands as well. That's a little bit more premeditated than by accident. But anyway, but yeah, and the sleep one that I mentioned before, for a lot of families there, waking up and seeing that your child's woken up at 5 a.m. or has been up in the middle of the night, mining or grinding, as they call it. So it can get really tricky, and you can see how that can impact on well-being. They go to school really tired, they're pretty ratty with their behavior then. So it has a snowball effect.
And that kind of brings us full circle. We need to wrap it up, but if we come full circle to this study from the Oxford Internet Institute, well-being may not have been markedly impacted in a study of thousands and thousands of mainly adults who are involved in gaming, with data coming from the gaming industry. But what you and I both see is parents saying, but my kids are driving me crazy. It's affecting my well-being, and it is affecting their well-being. And we need to be able to be helpful around that. So what a great conversation. For people who would like to know more, because we've barely scratched the surface, whether it's boys and the explicit content that they're finding online, whether it's boys and their non-stop gaming, or the fact that they're staying up and playing on their screens all night, or being sneaky or deceitful or devious, or whether they're gambling or any of those sorts of things, the Bringing Up Boys Summit, presented by Happy Families. It's on April 6th. Keep a lookout on the Happy Families Facebook page. We'll have a whole lot more information about that soon. Brad, what a great conversation. If people want to find out more about you and the work that you're doing as the Unplugged Psychologist, where would we send them?
Yeah, just jump on my website, unpluggedpsychologist.com.au, and you'll be able to find everything there, or, the usual social media stuff as well. Ironically, that's where parents land sometimes. Otherwise, I'll see you at the summit.
I just realized what you said. That is so funny. You've got to go online to find the guy that helps people with their online problems. That's perfect.
The irony is not lost on me, Justin, but that's where parents are. So you got to go where they are, right?
Brilliant stuff. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more info about how to make your family happier, especially the Bringing Up Boys Summit presented by Happy Families, April 6th, you can get all the info you need at happyfamilies.com.au.